I'm somewhat put together. Sorry.
You have a pin in your hair or
Yeah.
pencil or something you need?
No, I'm good. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a surprise coffee with Mildred this afternoon. I am with Char Nelson Anderson and her daughter Lori. We'll get to those introductions later, but just to remind you what Coffee with Mildred is all about, I wanted to bring the local history to the public and to be able to, especially in this time of COVID, be able to sit down, have a cup of coffee, and enjoy listening to the stories that we grew up listening to. Always wish we recorded and never did. And I'm doing it. I'm bringing it to you, and so I hope you enjoy it. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel so that you can be notified when we have these ones that are not on Tuesday nights at 7. And with that, we will get started. So I'm going to turn the camera around here. All right, do we get both of you in there?
Yeah, good.
That's
just fine.
That's all right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so if you want to, we'll start with you, Char, and introduce yourself, and we'll start there.
Okay. Well, I'm Char Anderson, as everybody knows. I've been here forever. I'm 90, and I had 6 children with my husband.
Mm-hmm.
I'm number 5.
And I've lost 2 of the 6, but I have 4 left. So I have multiple grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and I have 2 great-great-grandchildren, Liam and Ava.
Oh, wow.
So I just visited, and I'm getting over it. I was down there for a week, or 2 weeks, but it really tired me out.
Yeah.
It's a long drive to
Iowa
to Des Moines. So, and I'm Lori Anderson Spry, actually Lori Rebecca, and I was supposed to be Serena Antoinette in 1957, and I was born in the doctor's office. And on purpose, because there wasn't a hospital yet. The hospital came after my youngest brother, Elton, was born. So it's now South of the Border Cafe is where I was born.
Oh, really?
And Dr. Soderberg was the doctor, and the nurse had some sort of upset.
Was his wife.
So my father experienced the first of his 6 children's birth because he had to stand in, and it was Easter Sunday morning. So Grandma and Grandpa, Mom did what she could, and then Grandma and Grandpa finished getting the kids ready for church. And when I was born, I was a blue baby, and Dad had never seen a newborn, so he tried to smother.
He assumed she was deformed, so he wouldn't let me turn my head and see her, because he'd never seen. When they come out, they're sort of compressed.
Right, they're a little wrinkly and
white and cheesy.
Yeah.
So he said, "Don't look, Char, don't look." And then the doctor was fixing and doing all what doctors do. And he said, "So what is her name?" And my mother said, "Her name is Serena Antoinette, after my great aunt."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great.
And so he said, "This is no Serena Antoinette."
And
only in a local Grand Marais in 1957 could that happen. And he said, "Do we have an alternative?" And Mother said, "Yes, Lori Rebecca. But my name is Laurie. So when I read Little Women and saw that Joe's boyfriend was Laurie, very confused. So Dan's brother Clint always called me Lowry, and he was the one that told all of my classmates that I was actually a boy's name.
Oh.
So it means Larry or Lawrence.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
So we also have Dan Helmerson is on the phone with us to help with
the Helmerson family.
Yep, the Helmerson side of things. And we will do an interview with Dan at some point separately, but he's here to help us out today as well.
So go to the start, Mom.
Yeah.
So how did your family come to be in Cook County?
Looking at the bottom picture, that was the Nelson farm up on Maple Hill. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother emigrated by herself from Norway at the age of 13. and worked in Grand Marais, helping with family where the mother was ill and there was a bunch of kids, and the husband was, I believe, a doctor or attempting to be a doctor. And so that she was here 7 years before my grandfather was able to come. She earned enough money by housework to pay for her parents to come and her boyfriend.
Okay.
And they were in Duluth shortly after they got married, but she had already homesteaded up on Maple Hill. And I have a picture of the place right there. Her aunt painted it. And the picture up above is the Helmerson side.
All right, let me see if I can just show these.
So what was her maiden name, Char? Tilly's maiden name.
Tilly's maiden name was Pedersen, Pederson. And she had two brothers, Anton and Jurgen, and they both had
And they came over too?
yes, they came over with their parents, of course, with their mom and
And
dad.
then they lived, and they were all on Maple Hill?
Correct. So that place was the most popular place in Cook County. My grandmother was an outstanding cook. She could make
Why
Grandma
you know
Tilly.
where on Maple Hill?
on 6.
County Road 6.
On Meridian Road, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
The Meridian Road goes right past it. It used to be one of the sharpest curves, I think, in Cook County. I almost had to come to a stop. Now they've rounded it out. It's as you come over the hill,
You leave
heading
here and
north.
go.
Yeah. So it no longer exists. It's down now. For years, Mr. Wilson lived in it, but it's a beautiful piece of property.
After church, Tillywood and the Maple Hill Church, my grandfather helped with building the prayer rail in the front. And Grandma would invite them to come, not everybody, but the minister and his wife and so on and so forth. Lang's to her place for Sunday dinner that she'd have cooking while she was at church, that she would start the night before. She made meatballs, and I watched her one time when I was little, and she died when I was 4, so I was impressionable. And in my memory as a 4-year-old, it looked like a dishpan full of meat with eggs and breadcrumbs and cream and herbs and spices, and she made balls. I thought they were the size of a big baseball, and wrap them in wax paper and put them out in the summer kitchen to freeze. Well, that's what she'd make into Swedish meatballs with mashed potatoes and vegetables on Sunday dinner. And they all expressed how wonderful her meals were, from the pies to the meatballs. That was the best.
Do you still have her recipes?
No, but
No.
Auntie Florence had them, and she passed some on, so it's a mental memory. But with the child, it was a dishpan full of meat. I suppose it was a big mixing bowl.
Yeah.
But my mother would be monkeying with, pound baby. So it was exciting to watch Grandma. And she was short and dumpy, and she wore most often a black dress with a lace collar. That was her Sunday clothes.
Okay.
Anyway,
She was very tiny.
She was short and she was round. And she had all those babies.
How many babies?
She had 4 sons and let's see.
Arvid, Ralph.
Arvid, Ralph, Raymond. I'm missing one.
Thelma,
Florence. Yeah. And Thelma was my treasure, my pet. She was married to Russell Zerba, and he was a fisherman in Colville. And I loved going there. And she was like her mother, immaculate home and very good food.
But she was tall and slender.
No, Thelma was short.
She was short,
tiny.
Too?
Yes.
She died in
Florence was tall.
1959.
It's in there. Aaron was 4. Thelma and Russ were godparents to my son Aaron. Where was I? Anyway, so that was Grandma. That she and Grandpa. And Grandpa was twice as tall as her. She came to his armpit. and she was the head of the house. When she barked, he jumped.
Mm-hmm.
And that was fun to watch. But they lived below the hill. So Christmas time at Grandma's, she'd have the tree in the middle of the living room, and there were French doors that closed the living room from the dining room. And she would open those doors, and there would be the tree all lit with candles, and beside it a pail of water and a dipper. And we dance around the tree, and then they blow out the candles. Then it would just be lamplight.
Yeah.
Because it was, guaranteed a fire if you turned your back.
Right.
So anyway, and you danced around the tree. My grandfather made me skis. He bent the wood over her cook stove. He had a wooden rack up above, and he'd lay the board on top, and the steam from the tea kettle and the cooking, and he bent it so they turned up, and he made it ornate in the front. And then he took a deer hide and with the fur and cut strips and tacked it to the ski. So when I put my foot in, the fur would take the snow off my boot. And he made the harness for my shoe. And I would ski on the hill above that house in the picture.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes at night he'd take the big flashlight, had I think 8 batteries, and it was about 1.5 feet long. And he'd pull me to the top of the hill, and we'd slide down together. And then he'd pull me back up again. He was super grandpa.
Yeah.
And Grandma died when I was 4. And mother said, I don't know about that child, what she's going to be. And my grandmother said, she'll either be something great or nothing at all. Well, that was safe.
Yeah.
So, and she'd make me black sateen bloomers because there was no sense in the white underpants when I was sliding around the floor.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that was your mother's parents?
My father's.
Your father's parents.
Nelson's. The Nelsons.
And who was your father? Which one?
Ralph.
Okay.
The second
So
one.
Arvid was the first one, and then my dad, and then Raymond. And Raymond had temper tantrums. He was big and robust, and he was a red Norwegian. He had red hair, and he was very brusque. He was a guide as an adult. He cooked at fancy places in Duluth or Minneapolis for gangsters.
Oh.
And he and his wife were on Greenwood Lake. They were the caretakers and the cook and the waitress. She was the waitress, he was the cook. And the boss would call him from Minneapolis and say how many were flying in on a seaplane. And he'd have the roast, the right amount of doneness and rawness or rareness.
Yeah.
And one time, this man brought his wife with him. I almost said lady friend, but I think she was his wife and her friends. And after the meal, she was kind of putting on the dog. And so she said, Raymond, we'll take our demi-tasse in the living room. And he was on his way into the kitchen with the plates, and he turned around and he gruffly said, you'll have your what? Where? And she said, we'll have the coffee in the living room, please. She put her right back down a notch. But it was just funny because that's the way he was.
Yeah.
And he had a heart of gold. He knit me a sweater for my doll out of men's colored wool from leftovers from the socks that he knit. It was dark brown with green trim, and I wanted pale pink for her, but it was a nice sweater.
Yeah.
He also built log cabins, Raymond
Yes.
did. But Grandpa Ralph, your father, was worked many jobs. He was up at Hedstrom's. He was
As a little boy, he worked at Hedstrom's. And by little, I mean 12, 13, maybe 14. He was at the saw rig, and they used to pull the circular saw up and clean the sawdust away from it. And he dropped his glove, and he bent to get it just as they put down the saw. So he got sawed on the side of the head. So that was his part forever. And Mr. Hedstrom said, "Oh, I can fix that." And my father said, "He's not the horse. He's going to town to be fixed."
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so that's where Daddy started out, and he just remembered Mr. Hedstrom's temper. When things didn't go the way he had planned, he would become quite fitful. And
Which Hedstrom was
Andrew,
that? Andrew Hedstrom.
that
Okay.
Daddy of them all.
Mhm.
So my dad talked about one time when he hit himself with a hammer. He was on the roof and he threw it because it really hurt. And so the boys that were helping found it and brought it back up after lunch. And he was not happy when he saw it, and he threw it again. He wasn't any part of it. So it
Oh
was
goodness.
just one of the stories my dad told in a friendly way. He said it was wonderful to work there. All the men were congenial, and it was cold.
Yeah.
But they all brought their thermoses and lunches. And after that, he worked for the county. My mother took jobs cooking here and there. There was a restaurant where the garage is now. It was called the Lamplighter, and she did the cooking for that. Two gentlemen from Minneapolis became friends of hers, and she encouraged them to buy that place. And it started out as Chinese cabins.
Chinese hilltop cabins.
You're right. Danny worked there. He was a waiter. And then it went to several other families. And the boys bought the building and restored it and opened it.
And where
With
was that again?
Neolina's.
It was Neolina's pensionat for a while.
Oh, it's up by where my grandparents lived on Highway 61. Where
Not
the
much.
Napa store is now.
Okay.
Well, it's Benny's.
Benny's Collision is
Yeah.
now. Okay.
Yeah, that
Right there.
used to be a darling little restaurant.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that has been torn down. A couple of the cabins
It
still
burned.
exist behind.
It burned. Yeah.
Grandma cooked there, but she also cooked at the school too, right?
Yes, she did. And she was pretty adventurous when she cooked at the school. They'd serve canned fruit, like fruit cocktail to the kids occasionally, but not the syrup. They'd take out as much fruit as they could. So they accumulated a lot of juices. And she and Mrs. Blackwell, he was the county town cop. She worked up there also. And so my mother said, this is really good juice. Let's make some wine. So in the school, they put yeast and so on to work and all this juice. And
Fermented it.
It fermented and the fumes were exiting the storage room, but they did have a good thing going for a while.
And where was the school when she was cooking?
Right where the school is now.
Okay.
It was
So
then.
that was in the 1950s.
Yeah, that was then called the new school, as opposed to the big school that was so beautiful where they've got Harbor View apartments. And when they took that down, it just broke the hearts of all the old people. Not so old.
Yeah.
That went to school there.
Yeah. Part of the problem was that when they built it, there was a lot of asbestos.
That's correct.
So,
But that was not irredeemable because it was basically a sound structure. And with the suits, they could have taken it all out. And then it would have been gorgeous apartments.
My dad has some windows from that school.
Yeah. And it was well maintained. Whoever they hired did a good job taking care of it. And
most incredible floors.
Yeah.
Bird's eye maple.
and then the staircase was heavy oak, and bathrooms in the basement, bathrooms at the midsection where we were allowed. That's where the high school kids were. But we'd look up there, but you couldn't go from grade school up above.
Okay.
That was junior high and senior.
And that's where you went to school. You never
Correct.
went to the new school.
No. I had children by then.
Yeah. Uncle Gary did though, because he was 6 years younger than you.
I don't remember him going to that school.
I think he might have been one of the first graduates. Do you know about that, Dan?
Yeah, Gary went there the first year when he was a senior.
Yep, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was just Mother and Gary and her family. And Gary passed away a couple of years ago now. And he was 6 years younger than my mother.
Okay.
And
I'm the cause of that there was that big gap.
Oh,
Because when my mother had me, she was a drama queen, and it just put the fear of the Lord in my father. And so there was no hopes of a sibling for me. And I tried very hard. I wanted to get Marlene Leonard, Marlene Boostrom. Her mother had babies every 2 years, and I knew that because I'd heard conversations about it, and she had 10 children, I believe. Marlene was the baby. And so I was 4 and I wanted her. But Pietro said, "You can't have her, that's our baby." And I was fit to be tied. My mother said, "Will you stop that? You can't just take people's babies."
fine, I'll go have some of my own.
yeah.
Exactly. It was very traumatic. And when my brother came, I was never allowed to touch him, like hold him or do anything like that until he was ambulatory or crawling.
Yeah.
He was a beautiful baby, and mother cherished him, to say the least. And my dad sent her to Duluth 3 weeks before he was due, and she stayed with her aunt. And he didn't go down for the delivery. He stayed home safe down when they were ready to come home. And I got to ride with him. And I just remember thinking that ride from Cook County to Duluth on partial gravel road was an eternity. And I said, "Daddy, I have to go potty. You're going to have to wait." And I said, "But I can't. You have to find some place for me to go." So we finally came to a wideness in the road, and he pulled off, and I was able to go. But he was fit to be tied.
I wonder how long it took back then.
It was dark. My dad put the cereal bowls in the warming closet on the stove. There's 2 doors at the top, because he didn't have time to wash them, the spoon and the coffee cups and the bowls. So he put those up there till he got home that night. And so we went down. I believe it was 5 hours
One way.
one way. And then we went to the hospital, and she was waiting. And then we stopped at Montgomery Ward. There was something she needed. I can't remember what. And then we proceeded to Beaver Bay, where Auntie Florence was, and went in and changed the baby and fed him. Mother did. And she had dinner ready. She was married to Philip Lundquist at the time. And we stopped there and had restrooms and continued on. And it was like 9 o'clock at night when we got to Grand Marais. But Grandma and Grandpa were down and had the stove going in the living room and the basket on the chair in front of the stove. So everything was warm and cozy. And the county nurse came and bathed them for the first week, because Mother was hopeless as far as taking care of a little boy. And it was a detailed affair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was able to watch, but no touching. So, but I was 6.5, but I remember it. And I thought, this is really, something where we have to have a nurse come in for a bath.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, he grew up, had the usual things in his life.
Yep. So when you went to school in Grand Marais, your whole education was at the old school in Grand Marais, but didn't you win a couple of things at like the fair and stuff?
Oh, I was health queen for 4-H 2 years. Well, they've already talked about that.
Well, Maria hasn't.
Okay. Well, 4-H, you had skills: baking bread, canning tomatoes, or some sort of vegetable, sewing. I said bread making, sewing, and health. And apparently, I was healthy. I passed something. Anyway, so I was sent down along with Wayne Anderson, but the first year it was Wally Berglund.
Mhm.
He was health king, and Carl Mort was farm boy of the year. And so they went, and Joanne Staples was sewing, and Molly Jane Howard was bread making, and Dolores was sewing. So what was Joanne? must have been cooking, because Dolores was sewing, Dolores Winterstern. And we all stayed in this tall building at the state fair. And Olga Soderberg was our chaperone. How she survived it, I'll never know, because it was like herding chickens when we saw the Ferris wheels and the all the exciting things to look at. And Mr. Campbell was the county agent, and he drove us all down. And they had a song across the water, the grand finale. An Indian boy from Red Lake, and Marge.
Oh,
She was married. Marge, what?
from Grand Portage.
From Grand Portage. Beautiful, beautiful Native American, partial Native American, and she had a white Indian deerskin dress, beaded, and moccasins, and she stood at one end of the reflecting pool, and the boy from Red Lake was the other. Made the hair on your neck stand up. They sang the Indian love call. It was just beautiful. Anyway, that was the first year. I don't know what happened the second year. By then I was a little more familiar with the territory, so I had more fun and did a lot of things that Olga probably was tossing and turning over, but that's all right.
What year was that? Do you remember?
44 and 45, I believe, or 33 and 34. So we were there like 5 days, and that was a lot of fun. All of us had a good time, and they won prizes. So it was Wayne Anderson the last time I went. It was Wally, who was much older than me, like four years.
Okay.
But I was too young. I was a candidate for Miss Minnesota because I lied. They said, "Do you drink milk every day?" Absolutely, 3 glasses. I never touched it.
I'm going to digress just a little bit, because we talked about Grandma Tilly and Grandpa John and their family, but we never mentioned Herman and.
Well, we're still on the Nelson family.
We're kind of jumping around
wherever we want.
Okay.
So you had been talking, and we progressed forward to you and Gary. So I'm just going to backtrack a little bit, since she had the pictures up that showed them, and say that for just to finish with the Nelsons, Tilly,
Matilda.
Yes, Matilda. Tilda is what they have on anyhow. She immigrated in 1888, and John Nelson immigrated in 1895. So she had been here a while before he came, and they started their family.
Did they know each other in Norway?
Yes.
Did they meet here?
Yes.
Yep,
And her parents didn't feel that he was the right man for her. Maybe why they let her go at the age of 13 over here, assuming she would outgrow this young love.
Right.
Yeah.
So he sort of followed her.
She sent him
for
money to come.
Wow.
She was what you would call a woman before her time. She
Yeah.
was very much a pioneer woman. What I'm sorry about is that her heart was in such bad shape, and they didn't have and all of her children actually have had heart issues, and
Onward.
on down. But Olena Helmerson was actually Olena Vanabu
B.
is my grandmother, Grandma Ruby Helmerson Nelson's mother. And she was married to Herman. And when they came to the United States, they came together from Norway.
Yeah, but they were not married. She came with her future mother-in-law and her future husband. And they were going through the immigration line at Ellis Island, which everybody had to do. And they spoke only Norwegian, of course, and so did the Nelson side. Anyway, my grandfather was an obstinate Norwegian, and he had a mind of his own about just about everything. Anyway, he was listening as they were progressing through this line, and there were Pedersons, Carlsons, Olsons, and Swansons. And as he got closer, he thought, you know, you need a name that's not the same as half the country that's moving over here. He was a Swenson. And so he gets up and they say, sir, what's your age and where did you come from? And what's your name? And so he told him what part of Norway he came from, how old he was. And he said, my name is Herman Helmerson. And his mother was behind him. And she almost fainted. And as she got up there, she said, and I'm his mother, and my name is whatever it was, Svensson. And he's not a bastard. Because he had picked a name out of the air. And
No, he picked his father's
Name, Herman.
His father's name was Helmer Svensson.
Helmer
Yeah.
Svensson.
So he became Helmer's son.
Helmer's son.
that was his way of being independent and individual. Anyways, my grandmother was behind her future mother-in-law, so then she was Ulina Vonnegut. And they were 3 years, I think, in the United States before they got married.
Yeah, they immigrated in 1890.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
She had brothers here, Peter, and Peter Vonnegut is Fritjof Vonnegut's father and Rodney Vonnegut's grandfather. And another brother, Hans, lived in Duluth, so she had family here. Hans was a commercial painter in Duluth, and there was lots of painting and building going on, so they were well-to-do, that family. Grandma's uncle and her 4 cousins, all girls. And they moved up to Goodhart, though they moved to Grand Marais first, Herman and Lena, and they were on the West Bay. And he was fishing from there. But he homesteaded up above Igrove Bay. And then when he finally got a house built up there, they moved. It was a log 2-room house, 1 room down and 1 room up, and the barn. And he also worked in the woods in the winter, so Grandma was in charge of the cows and the horses and the kids. Anyway,
so they had Lena and Herman had Albert, and then Harry, who is Dan's grandfather, then Hjalmar, then Ludi, then Ruby, and then they adopted a grandson named Glenn, who is Danny's father.
Okay.
So Danny and my mom are actually, how's that work out?
cousins.
She and Glenn were first cousins, but when he got adopted, he became her uncle. So Danny would actually legally is my mother's first cousin, but he's actually her first cousin once removed.
Yeah. And
Okay.
when Glenn died, Gary talked at the service down in the park, and he said that Glenn was brother, uncle, cousin,
Mm-hmm.
and he lived
Friend.
with us.
Yeah. He lived with Grandma Ruby and Grandpa Ralph.
Yeah.
As
After-
Mom and Gary were growing up for many years, because his adopted
Or
parents.
when he came back from the service.
Correct.
and before
Oh, before too?
yeah.
Mhm.
Oh,
So when there'd be something at school, he'd stay with Mother and Dad.
oh okay,
Yeah.
sure.
Mhm.
And Mother would order from the catalog. I've got a picture of Danny has it of him first day of school. My goodness, he had a 2-piece suit on and boots with a little pocket on the side for a pocket knife. He was the top of the line.
Oh my.
Yeah, very classy. A tweed wool suit.
So who were his biological parents?
That would be
Harry
Harry.
Helmerson, the second born of
Okay.
Herman and Olina, and he died tragically. I believe it was a brain fever, and Dan will go into more detail about that. And
So pneumonia. Pneumonia
yeah,
killed him.
what
Yeah.
finally,
Yeah, he had
right.
some mental issues.
And then
Mildred-Char was his mother.
mhm.
And
She gave him up for adoption because that wasn't done. They were not married.
there was nothing, no help for ladies with babies in those days, but there were orphanages in Duluth, and my grandmother went down there to see, and she was appalled, and so she came home and brooded about it, and then she made a trip back down again on the bus and got him. Being his grandmother, she was able to take him out when she could prove that she was blood, and brought him home. And my grandfather, she put him down, he crawled to my grandfather, who picked him up. Anyway, when he was going in the service, my grandfather was becoming more and more senile.
Mhm.
He had moments of clarity, but basically most of the time he was somewhere else. And he realized that something was going on because grandma was crying, my mother was crying, and he said, never forget who you crawled to.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's sweet. Very sweet.
So tell how they used to have to row from
Oh,
Grand
mhm.
Marais to Good Harbor Bay.
Mhm.
And then wasn't there a moose involved
There was
somewhere in the
there was a
water?
moose in the water, and my grandfather and his brother-in-law, Pete, and my grandmother were coming from town, and they'd walk up that trail above Thompsonite Beach to their home.
Mhm.
Anyway, they said, well, we could get winter's beat, so they rowed to shore and put my grandmother and the two boys on the shore, and then went back out and pounded the moose over the head with the paddles until he was subdued, so they didn't fight with him, and then pulled him to shore. And
And they had meat for the winter.
yeah. So that was one of the stories that grandma told, that she was on shore and the boat was going like this while they were trying to get the moose corralled. And of course, the moose didn't want to be corralled.
So why would they row from town to?
There was no road,
Okay.
none. So
Well, not down by the shore.
yeah, they
Yeah.
rowed down into what is Thompsonite Beach.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a trail through that would cut off quite a bit of miles. Later on, there was a road from Good Harbor Bay. Is that what you call it?
Yep.
Dan? Or Igro Bay?
Igro Bay.
Igro Bay.
Igro
Yeah.
Bay, and that's where he had
The
his,
Pike Lake Road.
Yep.
yeah, that's where he had his fish house, Herman. And he would walk down at 4 a.m, get in the boat and go out and either pick the nets or put them in, and then walk in and cut them all up and wait for the boat to come and salted them in a barrel,
Mm-hmm.
and the America would take them, the fish.
So Good Harbor Hill is where the top picture is from, and that's the Helmerson homestead. And that's showing it probably in the, 20s, Mom?
Yeah, well, the little log house is behind the big house. You can just see it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just 2 rooms. Fred and I lived in there when David and Vicky were little. We emigrated from Tofty back to Grand Marais.
After they got married.
After we were married, they had 2 kids.
Yeah, and that was
That was available.
that was available and close to great grandma and grandpa. And so then if you go down towards Cascade on County Road 7, if you go almost exactly across is Iglo Bay. And that's
Okay.
where great grandma and grandpa had their summer kitchen, and that's where they fished commercially.
They had a little house there.
Yes.
And then when they got old, the family agreed that grandma could no longer be alone taking care of grandfather because he was becoming more and more of a problem, and there really wasn't any place for people with Alzheimer's at that time. And she was doing the best she could, but it finally was getting too much. So they pulled the house into town and put it on my parents' property. The family, her brothers and sister, agreed that that was fine and that they just put the cabin there. So that's where grandma and grandpa lived until he died. And then she continued on there for a year, almost 2 years. She died the year that David was born. Just laid down, took a nap, and did not get up. So Grandpa, on the other hand, ended up in Moose Lake a little bit, and then he got pneumonia and was transferred to St. Luke's at the time that Vicky was born. So the whole Helmerson family was down there because Grandpa was dying, their father. I was there because I'd had a baby that was really little, so they were holding the baby. So the whole family trooped up to look at Vicky and uh, analyze whether she was going to make it or not. So it was pretty interesting. Delmer was just shaking his head. She was so little he couldn't believe that something that undone could survive. Anyway, they kept her 3 weeks and then I got her home.
What's, I think Danny and I can both attest to the fact that Jalmer and my Grandma Ruby and Uncle Albert and all of the kids that survived were close with all of us kids. Now, Jalmer and Rachel never had children. And Moody lived out, that's the oldest sister. She lived out in California. Grandma Ruby was right here in town. So we all were raised together. And that, and then Uncle Gary's 3 girls, Doretta, Catherine, and Stephanie. It was, we all
Family was family.
Family was family. And then Mom and Dad got married in 1946.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time she was 29, she had 6 kids.
28.
28. She had 6 kids.
Char, tell the story about when you lived in that tent when you were
Oh,
up
yeah.
the trail.
Oh, you want to hear about this? You don't want to miss this. When I was born, my dad worked for the county, and they had a cabin up on Iron River, Iron Lake, Iron River, county cabins. There was 2. Fritjof and Edna Wannabu had the two room one because they had Harvey, Lorraine, and Rodney, who was a little older than me. So Daddy and Mother had the single cabin, and they had me. And so my mother had me in Duluth, and then she came home. So her mother could bathe me for the first week or so of my life and tried to show my mother the details of bathing babies. And then my dad said it was time for her to go home with him. So they trundled all the way up the gravel road, the Gunflint Trail, and to the cabin with me. What did you ask me, Dan?
About the
Okay,
tent.
I thought you said there was a tent.
Oh, yes. Okay. Anyway, so that was my first home. And then we came down in the winter, and you remember where Alma and Ray Olson lived in town? Their grandson still lives there. Anyway, that was available in the winter, so we lived there. Then my dad decided that he couldn't afford to pay that money every winter to rent something in town. We'd go up the trail for the summer, which was basically pay for your own food. Other than that, it was free. The water was out of a pail. And so he said to my mother, we will live in a tent so that I can save the money to put in the foundation to build a house. Because I think it was like $35 a month to rent that house. And so 6 months of 35 amounted to quite a sum.
Yeah.
To buy concrete. So we put a tent. We just got done talking about that hotel, Mrs. Priney's pensionat. Right across from there was my parents' property. And the house that he built is still there. And the little cabin that was my grandmother's that was hauled up was still there. But we lived in a government tent. My dad put in a wood floor, and then he had a small tent next to it for staples. And my mother's nephews slept in there, and he came home from a party out night, and there was a bear in there in the flower bin. So that scared the living daylights out of Norman Helmerson to crawl into a tent and run into a bear. Anywhere. I remember being in the tent. They had me in the crib, which was a 6-year crib. And Gary, of course, wasn't there yet. And Mother, with her neatness, is scrubbing this board floor where the water runs through to underneath, and she was crying, and what's going on over here?
Oh, I'm getting another call.
Anyway, wash tubs hang on the outside of the tent,
Mm-hmm.
and scrub board and water from the creek. And that's where we spent 2 summers while he saved up enough money. And Dynamite Pete helped dig the hole into the basement, and they framed it in. And
Who's Dynamite Pete?
he's a gentleman that knew how to dig holes.
What was his real name though?
Dynamite Pete. That's
Okay.
all I ever knew. He was the one that knew how to place the dynamite to blow the rocks out and so on.
Sure.
And he dug the well in the basement. After he dug the basement and they put in the frame and poured the concrete, then when that dried, they took those boards and put it on top and made the subfloor.
Mhm.
So forever after, if you drop something in the kitchen, it knocked concrete on whoever was down in the basement, because those boards still had little pieces. Anyway, so we use everything that's available and put it to good use. Yeah.
So when you say he dug the basement, did he dig it with concrete, or I mean with dynamite then?
He blew when he had to because there's
Okay.
shale everywhere, but he hand dug bedrock. Yeah, he had bedrock and he had to get down a certain depth. But putting the well in the basement was my mother's idea of getting running water faster, because at least it wasn't out in the clearing where you'd have to add pipes and so on. It was just in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
It was a small footprint.
What year did they build that house?
Let's see, Gary was born in 36, so I want to say 30. Let's see, I was born in 30. I was four when they started, and it was livable when Gary showed up.
So, 36.
Yeah, the house was there. We never lived in the basement.
No.
The floor wasn't poured until I left home. And we had water in the kitchen sink, but we didn't get a bathroom until the year before I left.
And Uncle Glenn lived there with you.
Yep.
And
No, it was a 2-bedroom house. And we
You want
had
to talk about
Max.
Matt?
his name was Max.
Mackenzie.
M-A-C.
No,
Oh,
Mackenzie.
Matt.
His name was Lyle Mackenzie. No, not Lyle. Mackenzie was his last name. And
Yeah,
everybody.
you called him Matt.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Whatever.
Max. Anyway, I worked for Lucy Frogner, Mrs. Dr. Frogner. He was a CCC doctor. During the war, he was commandeered to go because he was a doctor. That left Lucy alone here with Peter Carl, and she was pregnant with Jean Ellen. And she had always had trouble getting pregnant. And so Peter was called the Rock because she didn't lose him like the other babies. And so she had Peter first, and then she had Carl, which was uneventful, and he was a gentle, soft young baby and young man. I absolutely adored him. That's why Elton's name is Elton Carl.
Mhm.
Anyway, but he got her pregnant shortly before he was shipped overseas. So he didn't get to see Jean Ellen until she was almost 2.
Because he was a prisoner of war.
He was prisoner of war. Anyway, so I was her standby for 4 years. I went there after school every weekend. So it was like my babies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I got them by osmosis. So when Frog was re-indoctrinated, it was at Hot Springs, Arkansas, because they were so malnutrition and mentally abused from being in prison camps that they had to have treatment. And she was asked to join them down there. So she left me with the 3 kids. You know what used to be the pie place?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that white house right behind it, that was where she lived. And she was probably the world's worst housekeeper. So, it was very low on her list. And she said, you know, when Jean Ellen went to college, there was still baby dresses in the bottom of my ironing basket. She was kidding, of course. But I believed her because when I'd come, I'd dig to the bottom and get them out and iron the sleeves up and so on. Anyway, so she and I had a bond, and we had no reason to ever argue. She and I never. And she talked to me like an adult, and I realize now that 50% of what she was telling me I didn't really understand because I was 11, 12, 13, and so on. And in the basement was cardboard boxes full of medical books. So when I was there, she said, "Do you want to read them? Go get them." Well, of course, water and moisture was deteriorating. The pages were stuck together, but I read medical books the whole time I babysat. So, and then where was I going with this?
Well, Dan asked you to remember about Max.
Oh,
who was also
okay. Then Max was Ellen Meske's father had the Royal Bohemian Brewery in Duluth in the early days. He was right from Germany. He had a daughter, Ella, and another daughter. Anyway, Ella's mother had a chauffeur, and when she was dying, she told Ella, "You take care of Max the rest of his life." She had set him up in a liquor store in Superior Street and so on. So he was a gay 90s guy, and he had arterial blockage. Of course, it's called Berger's disease now, and at the time there was no known treatment for it except liquor, which expands veins.
Mm-hmm.
But he was also a heavy smoker, which counteracted the alcohol. While he was in treatment at this hospital in Minneapolis, he met Anna Pluff's significant other. His name is in my cookbook, but I can't think of it now. And they were living in a little trailer at Lucy Frogner's because Lucy had lived up on Bluff's Point up.
can't help it. Way before my time.
Well, the name of the road that goes out of Tofty north. Sawville. Thank you, Dan. Bluffs Creek. And she came home and she had this gentleman friend who had lost part of a leg. And he also had a friend that he'd met in the hospital named Max. And so both of them were living in this trailer house at Lucy's property. And Lucy had 3 kids to take care of, and she had a drunk doctor that came back from the war badly damaged emotionally and physically. And so she asked me, "You know anybody that would be willing to be part-time nurse and homemaker for these 2 guys?" And I said, "Well, my mother always said she wanted to be a nurse, but I don't know." She, she can't read a thermometer, but well, no, she couldn't cook. She couldn't read it. Clara Dewar is the one that told her that I had a temperature of 104. Anyway, she's looking at the bulb and it didn't change. So these 2 guys end up, Anna took care of her man, her significant other, and mother agreed to take Max. And so they had to roll away in the living room. That was where Max slept, in his wheelchair. And he had
he had no legs, right?
He had no legs. He had 8 amputations.
Wow.
Because they kept dying because of no blood. What just happened to Ray Schobert? It's a disease, and it's a bad one. Anyway, he was a jolly good fellow, and he was higher than a kite most of the time because he'd have 2 fingers frequently. And my mother was trying to keep everything under control. My bedroom was my little dressing table with the skirt around it. Had no closet, so there was a board with some hooks sticking out of it. I had the top bunk. Glenn and Gary had the bottom bunk. And my mother and dad had the master bedroom, and Mac was in the living room. So it was a house full for a 2-bedroom house with no working bathroom, basically.
Yeah.
So it did come in shortly after Mac arrived. But anyway, so that was how it was when I got married. And when I decided to leave, I did.
So how did you how did you and Fred get together?
I had friends in Tofty from being at school. I gravitated to people that were at least a year older than me. Some were two, and I liked the excitement of the Tofty bunch. They were called the Beeler bunch, and they were trouble looking for more trouble. And so it was always fun. You never knew what you were going to do, and it was mischievous. There were times when I wasn't with, they did things that weren't as mischievous. But we'd crawl up the fire towers, for example, and I've got a picture of Fred hanging from it. And literally, I mean, it was like wires. And one thing led to another. He didn't dance, which was a shortcoming, but he didn't mind if I danced with somebody else, unless I was enjoying it too much, and then you get a sour face. But I said, so I'm supposed to dance with these guys that you say my wife likes to dance. Why don't you dance with her? I'm supposed to be when I'm out there. I said, of course. I smile at them. They're kind enough to take me out on the floor. Anyway, my mother decided he needed to learn how to dance. So she taught him in the living room, around and around the drop leaf cot.
She loved to dance.
She loved to dance. And she said it was very much like dancing with a starched shirt. He was so thin. He was 130. So it was basically nobody was there in that shirt. But he did learn how to dance, and he loved it in the end, and he turned out to be a good dancer. So we got married, and
1946,
Yep.
and November 2nd, 1946.
Yeah. He was 18, October 28th. We had to wait until the groom,
October 27th.
27th, till the groom was 18, even though the parents signed. That didn't make any difference. The only way you could get a license was to go through the governor and get a special dispensation. I thought that was a stretch.
That was partly because of the war and young men getting married to avoid being drafted.
I don't know what it was.
It was a carried over.
Anyway, so he never was in the service. His brothers both were George and Harold, but Fred never had to go. Anyway,
He was born in 1928.
So he was 18 and you were 16?
Correct.
When you got married?
Yeah. So Vicky showed up, and then 2 years and 10 days later, David showed up. And then 3 years later, Wanda showed up.
And 3 years later, Aaron showed up. And 2 years later, I showed up.
2 years later, you showed up after
Aaron.
And then not quite 2 years, Elton showed up. So it was a learning or lack of learning. We ended up with 6 kids, but I wanted
So
to
tell him Elton's claim to fame for his birth.
say it again.
Elton
Tell
was
Elton's claim to fame for his birth.
Oh, Elton was the second child born in the North Shore Hospital, and the first boy. And so he was born New Year's Eve day, the day of New Year's Eve, and early in the morning. And so all my lady friends and their husbands were going out dancing and having fun, and they showed up to see the baby and me. And they had glitter in their hair, which was the style then, with really done hairstyles with glitter. And Dr. Soderberg said, "I'm going to have to chase those girls out that got glitter all over the window looking in the nursery at the baby." Anyway, Elton was crosswise. He was a transverse lie, which is an undeliverable position. And so it was him and I and LPN from Canada. And
in the delivery room
in the delivery room. And he talked me through it. And when it was over, the perspiration was just running down his face. And he said, "Will you pardon the expression, Char, that was a son of a bitch." Because he'd say, "I've got a knee and an elbow. I have a hand and a foot. I have a shoulder and a hip." He was trying to physically turn him. And Maria Drawley was on duty the next day. She said, "Why he don't call me? I go so little with my hands, I can turn that baby."
Yeah.
I said, "Well, we managed." He was into it knee deep, and there was no way out. He had to continue on. So that was probably the most traumatic birth. And
yeah. And then Dr. Soderberg's wife and my mother, Mim, and my mother were very instrumental in the hospital being built in the first place. My mother had 6 children, and
Mim only had Donna.
4 of them were born in Duluth,
Mhm.
and I was born in the clinic, and then Elton was born.
No, you were not in the clinic. You were
Born in the doctor's office.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then Elton was born in the actual hospital.
And Patty Nelson, had the first baby. She had a little girl, Peppermint Patty.
That's what my mother
She
said.
she was sitting on the porch when they opened the doors. It was that close. So
Yeah.
that was a little girl, then my Elton, and then Sarah Allard, the county nurse, had a little
Susan.
boy on New Year's Day. Little girl.
A little
New
girl,
Year's Day.
Susan, Elton's classmate.
And back in those days, I mean, Alton was certainly more of a traumatic birth, but when you had a baby, you weren't allowed to get out of bed, right? For like a week.
No, that was my mother's. That was 7 days recovery.
Okay.
Yeah, no. When I had Lori, I walked down the stairs. My mother told my dad to carry me. It wasn't the stairs that went down because it was upstairs. And I came down just fine. It was Easter Sunday and we had turkey dinner. Pat was in charge. And Mother had said, call it off. She's having a baby. And Pat said, I'm not calling anything off. I've got everything made. So we had dinner.
My cousin Doretta would
Do you
have
want to
been
tell about
6
how
months.
Grandma Helmerson delivered, was a midwife?
She was a midwife up on Good Harbor Hill. Actually, she was she practiced medicine with no license. She set broken bones. She took care of lumberjacks that had grievous injuries, and she boarded them until they were better. Some of them
Tell about the pie plates.
pie plates.
Did she have to reflect the light off?
Oh,
of the pie?
that's when she delivered Ruth Schuster, Helmerson, whatever her name ended up. In this desperately poor house up the road, everybody was desperately poor. I mean, you had enough to eat, but you didn't have anything extra. And there were no electric lights, and they had one lamp in the kitchen and one in the bed, carried into the bedroom. And the twins were coming, and Grandma kind of knew there were 2 of them from all external manipulation. And so they stood the pie plates up behind the lamp to refract the light so she could see what was going on. The tin plates. And Ruth and her twin sister were born.
Janet?
No.
Is it Janet?
That's her daughter. Janet is a Schuster. And Sandra is a Schuster, but Bobby is a Helmerson. That's Norman's.
Mom
So
can't.
who was born? Ruth?
Ruth and her twin sister.
Oh, Ruth had a twin sister?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And Grandma got them both out safe. So as Ruth, I'm not going to say that's not nice. Anyway.
And then Ruth ended up
marrying Grandma's grandson. Yes.
Right.
She married Albert and Sophie's son,
Norman.
The
one who lived in the tent when Mother with the flour and the sugar when Mother and Dad were building. Anyway, Ruth caused problems in the family, her family and Norman's family. And so Grandma was aggravated. There's no reason for anybody to stir up trouble. Let sleeping dogs lie and continue on. And so
gossip.
She didn't. She had heard about this going on, and she was upset. And so she ran into Ruth and pretty much told her to keep her mouth shut about things that didn't need to be broadcasted. And Ruth defied her. And my grandmother didn't use foul language. It wasn't part of her personality, and she was struggling for a phrase. And she said, Ruth, you're nothing but a haggy baggy. And Ruth's brother-in-law, Earl Krause, Margaret's, not brother, cousin-in-law, Margaret's husband, was there and he heard it. And Earl stuttered And he was telling the family, he said, Grandma called her, and Mother said, what did she call her? And he said, she called her a hanky baggy. So before he got it out. So that became a word for the family. Anytime anybody was out of order, don't be a hanky baggy.
So Earl Krause would be Larry Krause's
Daddy.
Oh, okay.
dad. So Mother's first cousin, Margaret, was the oldest of Albert and Sophie's.
That would be my mother's
And she
niece.
died of cancer in 1951.
Two.
51. No, you're right.
52, when Wanda was.
Yep, little girl. So,
Anyway, we lived in many places, and we finally landed in the farm. But we lived here, there, and the next place, from the sublime to the ridiculous.
she and Dad.
Yeah, and the
had-
kids.
We had the house that it's now called the Critchley House in my era. I don't even know who lives in it now, but it's
A mess.
well, it's not a mess so much as it's completely changed. It's on the Dunflin Trail, and I remember the Bloombergs were across the street, and the Cramblets, and then
It's the house right below the daycare.
Yeah.
right below the daycare was the house that Mom and Dad had moved with some help from Maury Quaife. He needed to clear some land, and he had this house. So
He wanted where the house was because the Erickson gas company moved
Right.
in there.
Mhm.
And it was very valuable, and the house was not. So Fred said, he came home and he said, honey, I bought a house. I said, really? Where's the house? Well, you're sitting in it, because we were renting it. And I said, I don't want to live here. Right on the highway? Are you crazy? No, we're going to move it. I said, okay. Where are we going to move it? We're going to move it up across from Edna and Fritjof, Wannabu, which is down below, like Danny said, below daycare, or whatever they call it. Because that was land that Maury Quaife owned, and he would be happy to unload the land so we could pay the taxes on it, and you unload the house. So Fred hired Carl Mort, who had never moved a house, and his truck, and he moved me and the kids, Ricky,
Mhm.
David, and Wanda, up till it was my mother, which was hell on earth to go with my mother and her neatness with three rambunctious kids in this little house, this
Yeah.
little 2-bedroom house. And Gary was still there, of course. Mac was gone by then. And Fred stayed in the house and got it off the foundation and got the chimney knocked down and so on. And then they rolled it on logs and onto the trailer and went up from Holiday
Mm-hmm.
Broadway.
up Broadway
Okay.
with it on a trailer, and then turned, and the new high school wasn't built yet. It was an airport,
Yeah.
but there was a telephone line in, and Alfred Fenstead, who was in charge of telephones at that time, came up, roaring up in his truck, and he said, you break that wire and it's going to cost you $500. Well, at that point, I don't think we had $5. Because whatever we had agreed to pay Carl, we did. And my dad was convinced that when they moved it, we'd be looking into the woods from the living room. And Fred tried to explain to him the turnings, that it would be okay when we got there. And so it was. My dad was, oh yeah, it looks nice. He gave up when he saw that it was when we got there.
I was 5 when we left that house on the Gunflint Trail, so I've only lived in 2 houses. And the house that they bought when I was 5 was up where Kathy Finn lives now. And it's actually in the historical registry downtown. It was from the catalog. C.O. Johnson lived in it, so.
He had Matt Johnson's grocery store.
No.
Yes, he did. He and his wife.
No.
No, Mom.
It's a different Johnson.
Just different John. That's Mateus.
Okay.
Yeah. So this C.O. Johnson his son was Harry, and Harry was married to the school teacher, Sally.
I'm talking about when C.O. had the farm.
Right. That farm belonged to
C.O.
and his son was Harry, who was married to Sally, the
I know.
teacher. No relation to the Johnsons that have the grocery store.
I know that. I'm aware of it.
Okay, good.
But he had something to do with the store because she would walk to town with 2 cream cans, Mrs. Seal, one, pardon me,
He said, huh,
in each hand to go to the grocery store with it to sell it.
okay, this is news to me. I
Yeah.
didn't know anything
So,
about that.
well, so she sold milk from the farm.
Yeah, he
to
had some,
Matt's
yeah,
store. Yeah.
he had something to do with Matt's store,
So they had a business arrangement.
apparently.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
so-
when your Aunt Ludi got married, Mrs. Seal made 5 different cakes and had them all on the stairs going down the basement where it was cool. And that's when the trees around the farmhouse got planted. O'Keefe brought the branches that they had pointed and they drove them into the ground. And then,
Really?
yes, and that's where the trees came from.
Huh.
And they had a shower on her, on Ludi, at Mrs. Seal's. So when we bought the house,
So
Mhm.
you've been in that, oh no, you weren't born yet, sorry.
That's correct.
what
She
is
was-
it?
You weren't born yet, so you wouldn't have been at the shower.
No, I wasn't at the shower. I only heard about it. What's her name? Oh, shoot.
You have to give me more than shoot.
Vicky's boyfriend's.
Ridgway, Mary
No,
Ridgway.
yeah, her mother, Mary's mother.
Um,
Schoberg. Schoberg. Old Del Schoberg.
Yes.
Said that she and Mrs. Seal were friends, sort of. Anyway, she said if she was here now, she'd be spinning in her grave because we had done different things, we did change it. Fred didn't believe that it needed changing, and it was a kitchen, and then it was a breakfast nook, which
Mhm.
is the most inconvenient, miserable thing for a family, because whoever's in there needs to go to the bathroom, so everybody has to get up.
Right.
So that was the first wall that had to come down. And when we did that, the sewer pipe from upstairs was exposed because, what's his name? From,
yeah. So this is the house she's referring to now that we grew up in. Whoops. I don't know if you can see these very well, but this is the side of it. And then this is the
front. And that's our
front
bedroom.
porch. And
the
that's
top.
granite mined right here
Mhm.
in Cook County. And it's called Arts and Crafts style. So it had a beautiful, beautiful quarter-sawn oak and bird's eye maple floors. And it had the entrance was, the porch covered the whole front. And it had a balcony on top.
Yeah.
And 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom.
And
My
one
dad
closet.
added one closet.
That was big enough for Fred's mother, for her bedroom.
The walk-in closet was off the girls' rooms. We had the
Oh.
girls' room, the boys' room, and mom and dad's room, and then grandma's was in the closet off the girls' room.
With a window.
And it had that back stairway, which was sort of.
Yes.
And
And
that became the girls' closet.
that became the girls' closet.
Dad filled in the floor so that Vicky couldn't get loose, or whatever.
She fell down the
door.
stairs periodically. She
Yeah.
fell downstairs.
We had a lot of sleepwalkers when I was growing up,
Yeah.
and
Erin was the worst.
Aaron. Well, they all were.
Yeah.
But
you changed the subject.
I did, because I was going back forward to the farmhouse,
Nice.
because you and Dad got married, and there's a whole lot of information there, but maybe that's for another day,
Yeah.
because you've kind of covered.
I think we got a
Yeah,
good
you have
start.
to tell about, your when you first started out in Tofty. Those are really great stories.
Yeah,
And
Mhm.
Maybe we should do one story from Tofty,
sure.
and then we'll save the rest. We'll kind of wrap it up and save
Now?
the rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't you
Okay.
tell when you and Dad?
When we got married. Okay, we got married in Minneapolis. There was a minister that married us, and Fred offered him $3, and he gave it back and said, I think you need it more than I do. And Fred's sister, Marge, was married to Orton Toffee the week before. Fred had a ring for me, but he took it off to wash his hands and forgot to pick it back up again, so I had to use Margie's ring. And as little as she was when she was old, her ring was way too big for me. So I had to hold it on with my thumb. And the minister's dog was sitting on my feet. Fred's friend had a car, which was unusual after the war. It didn't have any back windows. It had plywood. But
And
that's
who was your maid of honor?
March and Eleanor Mackenzie and Mac.
And Mac.
Yeah, that's my cousin. That would be Amy and Arvid's daughter, Eleanor, the oldest.
On the Nelson side.
And she did a miniature, what do you call it, after the wedding, you have coffee, reception at her house. And she made us a cake, and it was 2 layers with vibrantly pink frosting on it with a white rose that had sort of depetaled on the top. And she had
It was November.
She had Swedish meatballs and mashed potatoes, which turned out to be a traditional diet in her life. So, when you could get meat.
And Mom knew how to make Swiss steak.
I did. That was my specialty.
Mhm.
My mother and dad always knew when I told them to come for dinner, it was going to be Swiss steak. And they always fed my brother first because he was an extremely picky eater and very leery of anybody's technique, whether it was neat and clean or an orderly or slapdash. And so mother would feed him. And Daddy always ate. And I found out after 2 years that Dad didn't like chicken because his parents had raised chickens, and he got involved in the defeathering and all that.
So where did you and Dad live
Okay.
when you first had Vicky?
We had a little cabin from Celia Olson after hunting season. Before that, I lived with Inga and Walford and the kids. They cleared the girls out of the bedroom, and I don't know where they put them.
When did you live at the Edgewater?
Oh, that was the summer after the winter.
I see.
There was the first year we were in Celia Olson's cabin, which was uninsulated, 2 rooms with the shed, and the kitchen turned out to be the shed. And the curtains actually moved. And so Fred's mother gave me an old union suit of Walford's, Fred's dad, and I stuffed it around the windows with a knife to cut the drift.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we had a pot-bellied stove in the living room that I just could not keep a fire going. I either forgot to feed it or fed it when it was too late, and so it would go out. So Grandma would say, Yanni, go build a fire for Freddie so it's warm when he gets home, because by 2 o'clock I'd go up to Fred's mother's with the baby because the house was then too cold to be in there. So I'd bundle her up and walk up the hill.
Mm-hmm.
It's the yarn shop in Tofty, where the road goes up to the cemetery. There's a tall white house. That's Mrs. John's first house. And that's where Fred and I lived for 2 months.
Yep. And then you had this place, right?
Oh, that's the hotel right there.
Yep. So this is done by Bruce Footerer, and I bought it for Mom and Dad for one of their anniversaries because it was the first summer place they had. Was a small apartment, and it was over. They had a restaurant there too as well.
Downstairs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Edgewater had a restaurant because I worked there with Vicky. I'd take her in the buggy and have her in the kitchen. And then their youngest daughter would eat all the tomatoes off my salads that I had ready. So she'd just go around and pick the tomatoes off. You know, you'd pre-do some things that you could before the lunch hour hit. It was called Edgewater. And it's very similar to Bluefin Bay. There was a restaurant across the front, but Tom Hansen had a grocery store. Mm-hmm. That's another story. It was after the war. It was very hard to get absolutely anything. And Tom and we had a bar at the top of the road. Ray Jarvis had a grocery store, and Ray's uncle had a tavern east of town, Joe, or west, I should say, of Tofty. So we had two choices, and the word would get out. Jarvis is got meat. Everybody would grab the baby buggy or whatever they had and hightail it up the hill to Jarvis's to get wieners or a hamburger or whatever. Or Tom has got meat, and so the same thing would happen. When we lived in a hotel, I was close to the source, so I knew when the meat came in because I worked in the kitchen, so I didn't have to run. But that was only during the summer. And then we lived in another one of Sylvia's cabins when Vicky was a year old, and that was a little more modern. Didn't have any running water or bathroom, but it was kitchen, living room, and bedroom, and then the closet, which wasn't finished. Well, it was going to be the bathroom.
When Wanda was born, or Vicky?
Vicky.
Yeah.
Did I say Wanda?
I may have misheard you. I'm
Okay.
not sure.
Okay, no, it was just Vicky.
Yeah, because
David
you
had-
moved to when David was born, you had moved into Good Harbor Hill behind Grandma and Grandpa's.
No. I lived on top of the hill in Tofty when David was born.
So David went with you to Grandma Ray.
Correct.
Okay.
And Vicky.
Mhm.
But David was born January, 2 years and 10 days after Vicky. And I stayed in Duluth with this Ella Mesky, the lady whose father had the Royal Bohemian. I stayed there for a month waiting for him because Dr. Erberg was convinced that I was in outer Siberia. There was no vehicles to get me to Duluth. When I left there after the baby was born, Jack would be bulging with canned formula and vitamin drops and so on, whatever a baby might need. Dr. Erberg delivered Vicky, David, Wanda, and Aaron. And when Aaron was born, I said, when can I go home? I was showing the delivery table. And he said, I'll tell you what, just bring your coat. Next time you can just leave right from the delivery room. Well, I had Lori in the office, so indeed I did. But by then he was gone.
Yeah.
But he was wonderful. When I went to him when I was pregnant, my mother was hysterical and impossible. And so he was looking at the two of us like, you know, this needs a little sorting out. And he said, Mrs. Nelson, there has to be love. And it doesn't matter if it's in a shack or a mansion, period.
Mother was pregnant before she was married. And so that was why Grandma was out of sorts and
Impossible.
kind of being impossible. So Mother was actually sent to
Minneapolis
for a while, to a home.
From August, she expected me to reconsider my plans. Very mistaken. And so the minute Fred was 18, that when it was a done deal, they went and got the license, and he came down with his friend with the windowless car, and that was it. And
But while she was in Minneapolis, she changed her name, which was what you did, but then when you were in a home for unwed mothers, and she was Kathleen Kennedy.
Yep.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yes. That's how I got my mail. And everybody in the post office knew the heck it was.
Was Kathleen Kennedy the one
That died.
There really was a Kennedy sister.
Yes, there was.
Yeah.
I found
Was
out.
she the one that died?
Yeah,
Yeah.
in the plane crash.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I met some really fine girls, and I met some really not so fine. And I got to work in Stacy, which is where the babies went. But I had to fight because I was so young. And I said I worked for a nurse and a doctor for almost 5 years.
Mhm.
So I think of all of you guys, I have the experience I need. So,
Mhm.
and when Lucy was pregnant with the last one, when Frog was overseas, she almost miscarried. So Anne Eliason was a county nurse, and Dr. Smith was the county doctor, and they ordered her for bed rest. So I had Peter and Carl for 24-hour care. And she stayed in bed, and she held on. And along came Jean Ellen,
Yep.
who was named after Frog's sister.
So Raha Scott, that's another
That was-
story, another person that my mother cared for her children, and
Raleigh
That's
Dean
my-
and Terry.
they that's my godparents,
Mhm.
Raha and Roger Scott.
Yep. And she loved to play bridge in Graham Ray. That was her recreation. And I always babysat, and she had Duncan 5 furniture, so I would polish all that. And then Lucy said the only time the knickknacks ever got done was when I did it. She had knickknacks on her maple buffet, so I ended up with that. Anyway, Raha came home from bridge, and she was fiery red in the face, and she was walking like the militia, stiff-legged. And she would get her teeth together, and she was mad. And she came through the door, and I thought, oh my, what happened? And she said, those women and their loose mouths talking about people that they don't even know what they're talking about. And I sank into the Duncan 5 couch, and I said, Raha, were they talking about me? And she said, yes. And I said, they were right. And she just sank like a balloon that lost its air. And she said, have you told your mother? And I said, no. Oh my. Oh my. Mm-hmm. So apparently somebody at Bridge had heard it from somebody, because I worked at Naples Cafe. Mm-hmm. And so Auntie Sophie was the baker. And
it's hard to be part of our family and not be related to everybody and not have news come out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this wasn't an unusual situation.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't, but not too many people had my mother for a mother.
Right.
Yes. And Uncle Glenn, Danny's father, was instrumental in making sure that Ruby knew that the apple didn't fall far from the tree, and she was living in a glass house throwing stones, so she'd best back off. So
actually he slapped her.
Yeah. She was hysterical. Yeah. So
she said there'll have to be an abortion, and Glenn, of course, having
been illegitimate,
it was like a stab to the heart. So he said what Lori just said, and Mother was still ranting, so he slapped the noise out of her.
And Grandpa was okay with that. Yeah. He was just like, and so
I was at work and I missed out on that.
It was a good thing. Yeah. So anyhow, so that was a chapter in her life that led to a lot of fantastic years with Dad and his family that I think we could save for another time.
Yep. Yeah. Fred's mother living with us was probably one of the highlights of my life.
Yeah.
Because she lived with us for 19 years, and we never had a difference that whole time. Twice there was a difference, but it didn't amount to a hill of beans.
That's my dad's mom. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, there.
I had put the bread in the pans, and I said, Ma, I'm going to go take a bath, and the bread is fine, and I'll be back in time to put it in the oven. And I no sooner put my feet in the water than I heard bang, bang of the pans on the counter. So I got out of the tub and put my bathrobe on and went back downstairs. I didn't say a word. She was sitting in the corner doing her fancy work, whatever. Put the bread back in the pan and put it back in the oven, went back upstairs and finished my bath. Pa, my father-in-law, liked doughy bread. My kids and Fred like crispy, crunchy crust and good centers. And so I like mine well-baked. Not burnt, but well-baked. And so that was one. And the other one was a Christmas tree. And it was just sitting around the table making comments. And Fred had brought a tree home that was basically branchless in the back.
Charlie Brown.
Yeah. And it was beyond repair. My father would bring trees and he'd drill holes and add branches if there was a gap someplace, which is going beyond in the other direction. Anyway, I had tried angling it in several positions, and I gave up. There really wasn't a good side. And I said, my dad always brought a decent tree home for my mother. And she said, well, your dad did everything right. And that hit me on the wrong spot. So I went upstairs and brooded for a while, but I got over it. But that was as close as we got because, you don't criticize my father. He put up with more than any man walking should have.
So, yeah, no, we'll, yeah, that's.
Do you think I go too far some places?
No.
No?
No, I think you did a great job. So I'll just wrap it up quick.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we will definitely be back with Shar again, and Lori and Dan. Hit like and subscribe to this channel so you can join us at any time, be notified when there are new videos. Go to cookcountyhistory.org if you would like to join the Cook County Historical Society. You click on the Join Us button and you can get signed up with a membership or making a donation. Thank you for joining us.
Should have said that's a wrap.